American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow. Also joining us, former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer. Ari, let's stay on the theme of the media and the fact that, well, this is a big deal. I mean, you've dealt with these people.
Yeah.
This is probably the biggest media conspiracy theory lie on top of being exposed as colluding with the Clinton campaign.
Yeah,
this is not funny.
From a media point of view, one of the biggest facts that developed today, of course, was it was talked about repeatedly that now we know Donald Trump was never the subject of this investigation and that many people on Capitol Hill knew it. I tell you, Sean, right now, many people on Capitol Hill tried to get that to the press. The press willfully and deliberately ignored it because it was not in the interest of the mainstream media to put that story on the air. It ran counter to the velocity and the direction that all these stories must run, which is an anti-Trump direction. That's why the American people have so much lost faith in the press. They're not objective.
59%. Yep. What did you say? Willingly and what was the word you used? Willingly and deceitfully. What did you say?
I said that the velocity and the direction of all the coverage is anti-Trump. That's what they accept, and that's why they didn't put in the papers and or in the network news the fact that Trump was not under investigation, when I would bet you every investigative reporter heard that information. How
do they, if you're saying that so many people that knew, credible sources, multiple sources, and they didn't print it, that is beyond a media crisis at this point. This is propaganda, misinformation at a level I forget J. Adver Comey here. That's another big problem in all of, you like that name, right? I could tell. But Jay, go ahead, weigh in.
Well, first of all, this was the collapse of James Comey. I mean, look, this was a guy who actually said that the former Attorney General of the United States, Loretta Lynch, said, don't call it a case, call it a matter. And what did he do? He called it a matter. And then he publicly announced his decision to not prosecute and sort of vindicated her. He wouldn't do that for the president. That, as Marco Rubio did a great job on that he would not leak. But look at the collusion that's taking place here. People are talking about collusion in this case, right, which there's evidently no evidence of with regard to the president. So what's the collusion? The collusion here is James Comey goes over his testimony with the special counsel who's supposed to be investigating all of this. So what doesn't seem right here? Does it not seem right that that took place, that kind of collusion? Does it not seem right that the FBI director leaked a memo of his private conversation, supposedly, with the President of the United States, leaked it to a colleague, a friend of his at a law school in Columbia University, who then leaked it to the New York Times? And we're supposed to say, well, that's good. We like our FBI director to do that. And by the way, he said he did that in response to the President's tweet, except the contents of that memo came up the day before to the New York Times. So if you look at the timeline there, the timeline doesn't seem to line up. Well, what else is new? So he's going to go back and correct
an act of revenge, Jay? An act of revenge?
It was an act of revenge, but it fell flat. You know what everybody knew today? Everybody knew today that there was no obstruction of justice. Everybody knows today that there was no real collusion on anything. Everybody knows today that this is a witch hunt. And everybody should know today that this is costing the taxpayers a lot of money. And we've got North Korea, as I said earlier. We've got all these other issues. Yep.
And then I want to go back to Art. I want to know, you're right. What about this special counsel that, again, James Comey collaborated with the special counsel on his testimony today? Is that a conflict of interest? And does he need to be removed, not only because we know the answers at this point, and there seems no need for a special counsel any longer, although I know people like to, justify their existence, especially senators. They want their investigation. Congress wants their investigation. The special counsel now will never give up for 500 years if he can hold on. But in my mind, there seems to be a conflict if he stays in place.
Well, look, I think there are a series of conflicts. I think they have to be looked at seriously, and I think what James Comey also, not just with the dialogue with the special counsel, as he's called, but also the leaking of that. I mean, the leaking of that memorandum is very serious. And I think the FBI and the Department of Justice need to take a look. It may well be a crime. And by the way,
great. His former friends will be investigating him.
Yeah, well, but he doesn't only have friends there. And the fact is, if this was a big deal, as you said earlier, and Greg Jarrett's been talking about this so eloquently, 18 U.S.C. 4 is crystal clear. And when asked about it today, he acted as if he did not know the statute. It took him at least minutes to finally kind of recollect that situation. But then he said, well, I knew that the Attorney General was going to resign a couple of weeks later. How did he know that, by the way? Because this was a setup. He wanted a special counsel. That's why he got it.
Ari.
Yep.
What is your take on all that?
Well, look, I think we're at a stage now, we just have to wait for Bob Mueller to tell us what he has discovered. That is the reality of where this is going to go now. And, you know, I've never liked special counsel laws, but we have them. They're in place, and now Mueller has to get to the bottom of it. I have faith in Bob Mueller, frankly. I do. And the problem here politically...
Does it bother you that they collaborated on his testimony today?
Oh, I wouldn't know whether they collaborated. I think Mueller gave him permission to use the memos, and I think that was appropriate. He's going to testify. He needs to testify based on what he recollected. I don't have an issue with that. But here's the bigger issue. The future of the Democratic Party really now lies on whether or not criminal charges are brought against Donald Trump. The future of the Republican Party lies on passing laws. I would so much rather be in the position of Donald Trump and the Republicans today than the Democrats, because the likelihood is that Mueller is not going to find anything. As Jay pointed out, obstruction is unlikely. We now know collusion really doesn't exist. We'll find out if it does for anybody who worked on the campaign. There's no evidence of it. Unlikely. The Democrats are the party now that doesn't have ideas for the future. All they have is the hope for a criminal charge that I don't think is going to happen.
Not any longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, because here's a guy that comes from a business background, and I didn't like Paul Ryan's original comments, but he made this observation: if Comey initiated the original contact and a meeting alone with then President-elect Trump, and then didn't that sort of set a precedence for a guy who never spent a minute in the political world?
Sean, let me take that. There is not a possibility in the world that a meeting like that ever would have happened in the Bush White House. I knew, the president knew, everybody who's trained in politics knew if you're under an investigation by the FBI, you don't have a solo
Comey knew. Why
meeting.
didn't Comey say that I don't think we could talk about this?
That's
Explain
correct.
it to him in 2 seconds.
Correct. Comey said he's 56 years old. He should have acted like it and been the one who was strong enough to say, Mr. President, it's inappropriate, and opened the door and had the Attorney General and the Chief of Staff walk in. But I do make an allowance for somebody who wasn't raised in politics. They wouldn't know.
But he didn't. That was you know, Ari's right, but he didn't. I mean, this is the problem. James Comey had this thing. If you look at this evidentially, you look at the evidence, how it's lining up. What was the purpose of the leak? And I do have a problem with. And by the way, I agree with Ari that the Republicans need to be about the business of governing. And I was with the president today, and I will tell you, he's dealing with a host of issues, not the least of which is North Korea and national security issues and domestic issues. But let me take it a step further, Sean. That memo leak, I think, is problematic. And this was a guy that said under oath today that when pressed on why he did not report this, pressed on why he didn't react to this, he said, I wasn't strong enough. Right. And I think what Ari says there sets up the whole problem. I mean, this was, and James Comey had one goal with getting that memo released. And sure, the special counsel let him release it today. But what did he say his goal was? I thought if I released that memo and leaked it out, the special counsel would be appointed. And guess what happened the next day? It did.
We got to roll. Amazing analysis, both of you. Thank you so much for being with us.